I think the poet is talking about death as an enemy, and although it's generally it's a personification of death, and generally he's saying that death cannot harm him or kill him. He can overcome death, and he will be victorious over death.
That's a summary if I've ever heard one. Yeah, that I think sums up the general thing. But you said an interesting thing. Death as an enemy. I'm wondering to what extent death is painted to be an enemy in this poem. But if anyone else wants to
I
comment,
didn't agree with the enemy, but
I see.
I agreed with everything else. I found enemy a strong word. I would gather, to me, he's more like he's mocking that than it being his enemy. It's not his friend, but
All right, so we have this tone of mockery, even condescension, superiority over death. Death is usually perceived to be an enemy, but perhaps the speaker is positing that we shouldn't see death in that light. Someone was coming in, I think Galaxy A20.
Yes. Oh,
Tessa, it was.
can I go ahead?
Go ahead.
Okay, yes, to build on what Annette said, this poem, that's John Donne, I believe, right? Yeah, he is presenting, or he is presenting death implicitly in a haughty way. By that I mean death's arrogance. So we get a sense of death being an arrogant being that needs to be, in a sense, brought down. So if you notice, some of the ways in which he attacks death is to show death that you are not quite as mighty as you claim to be. Okay, there are obviously other elements that you need to work with. So it's not all about you. I see endorsed with poison one, sickness dwell. There are other elements that can do what you do. So in other words, don't be so haughty, you know. And of course, well, yes, the personification device is effective there. Or I'll double check, but it might also be an apostrophe as well. Right. So that's how I see the poem, basically, that death, you ought not to be so arrogant about your strength or your power. In fact, at the end, we shall conquer you, basically. So that's my general summary of it.
Yeah, and I think that's a comprehensive summary of how the speaker feels toward death. All right, so why don't we go from the title right down to line 14? Look at each line individually and see, what each line contributes to the speaker's argument as it relates to death needing to humble itself, or the speaker trying to humble death. We start from the title. Death be not proud. Of course, we have the tone coming out here. We see the arrogance, superiority. If someone is high and mighty enough to look at a person like death or an entity like death and say, essentially, humble yourself, then this person has some explaining to do. He will have to spend this entire poem basically justifying why he feels so powerful, and why death is weak and should not be proud. But can we try to contextualize the title in that the speaker is saying, death be not proud. Why is death proud in the first place, and what evidence do we have that death is proud? So I guess if we start there, we can enter line 1 more confidently. So why is death proud in the first place, and where do we see evidence of death being proud?
It starts off by saying some people see thee as mighty and dreadful. And that, to me, is where death may have gotten its sense of pride from, the fact that many people, many persons view death as a huge challenge, something to be afraid of.
We see here in lines 1 and 2 that the audience of the speaker might, in a figurative sense, be death. We know he might not literally be speaking to death, as that might be impossible. But I think the intended audience, or at least on one level, the intended audience might be these people here, the some people who call death mighty and dreadful. So while the speaker is, pretending to speak directly to death, he might be speaking to us, to the persons who fear death, the persons who call death mighty and dreadful. We mentioned some devices earlier on. Someone mentioned personification.
And it's an apostrophe.
The entire poem is an apostrophe, because we know that the speaker is speaking to a non-human entity that cannot respond. So that's an apostrophe. Death is personified throughout the poem, but I could even go as far as to say that death is anthropomorphized. We know we have personification when, in a figurative sense, something becomes a person. So it's a figurative ascribing of human qualities. But in this case, I think death is being painted to be an actual person. And we'll go into some reasons why death is given this. It's kind of a demotion, becoming a person, because we know that if we're dealing with a person, then it's not such a big deal. Death is this foreign entity, this universal force, this ultimate thing, this mystery. But if we're just talking to death as if it were a man, then how powerful can a person really be? And I think while we're on the topic of devices, in the title here, we have an interesting irony. Because pride is considered one of the deadly sins, isn't it? So we're dealing with death here. Death on the onset being accused of committing a deadly sin. So what does it mean when we commit a deadly sin? Does it not mean that we're bringing death upon ourselves? Those who commit the deadly sins, we have pride, we have greed. There are a couple of them. And these sins basically are what invite death unto mankind. So we have death here being personified, and we know that the personification belittles death and takes death off this throne that it is on. But how can we comment on the use of personification throughout the poem before we move on? Because we're just going to tackle the devices as we see them coming. Why is death personified? So we have one reason so far. Death is personified because, humans are basically weak. We are mortal. And even at the end here, we see the mortality of death being brought up. So the speaker personifies death. One, to show us that death is just like us. Death is going to die just like everybody else. Why else would the speaker personify or anthropomorphize death or use this apostrophe? How does that support the speaker's argument against death? Any ideas on that? I think that could be interesting.
To me, you hit on it when you said that he's bringing death to the level of human. So he's forcing death to step down and recognize that you are in the game of life, so to speak, and have an end, just like any other human person. So you shouldn't be exalting yourself above us, because we all have a similar fate, which is what you more or less was getting to just now.
All right. And we have to recognize that while this is personified or anthropomorphized, we might just say personified, it's a shorter word. While this is being personified, he's not personified entirely, because this is, after all, an apostrophe. And apostrophes are written not just to non-persons, but also to dead persons. So we see here that death, by being personified, has to sit down and listen to the speaker. But can death respond? Is death given any chance to actually, because this is an argument here. But we see that death is personified only to the speaker's advantage. It's personified only to the extent where it's a lowly human. It has to sit and listen and, basically listen to my lecture about how weak it is. But is death given any chance, as we look throughout the poem, to make any kind of response, to state its own claims, to have a rebuttal? How does the speaker use personification to kind of frame the argument to give himself an advantage? What if you look at the personification in that way? So let's look at lines 3 and 4. Any comments on lines 3 and 4? What's going on in lines 3 and 4? 3, 4. For those whom thou thinkst thou dost overthrow, die not, poor death, nor yet canst thou kill me.
Is this a reference I am imagining to the afterlife, immortality, that religious aspect where we believe, those of us, I guess, who are Christian, or not necessarily Christian, but most religions do believe in some afterlife where you live on, and that separation of, the mortal and the immortal, the soul and the physical, because he clearly saying, for those whom thou thinkest thou dost overthrow. So in other words, if you think you've killed people, they do not die. So I see the injection of religion here, because that is essentially what mankind uses to deal with the complex issue and the frightening issue of death. So I'm seeing some element of religion in those two lines.
Certainly. And looking at who the poet was, John Donne, we know that he was initially a Catholic. I think he renounced Catholicism at some point because Catholics were being put to death at that time. It was risky. But he was a Christian through and through. He was even appointed to be some kind of royal chaplain, something like that. He would deliver sermons. So I think it would be safe to assume that the speaker's confidence in death's powerlessness comes from his Christian idea that, death just brings us to the afterlife. What do we think about the word overthrow here? I think it might be an interesting word. Even for Donne's time, this word might stand out on the page. Why would this word be used as opposed to, simpler vocabulary?
Overthrow speaks to the idea of having control and power over someone or something, and it relates to what was said, it being mighty and dreadful before. So he's basically almost being condensing when he says, poor death, you really think you have control, but you poor thing, you really don't have it. And it's just to undermine any sense of power that others may think death has.
Yeah, I think that's well stated. The overthrowing here relates to the pride that death is said to have. One who is proud might think they are able to overthrow. Who is it that overthrows? Kings, generals, mighty men. So death is living in this delusion of grandeur, this idea of, I am like a king here on earth. I can overthrow. And the speaker is really humbling death by saying, yeah, you think you're overthrowing people. You think you're this mighty power and force. But those who you think you overthrow, not even those who you do overthrow, those who you think, because this is happening just in your mind, they do not die, and you can't kill me. We also see some alliteration in this line. We say that those thou thinkst thou overthrow. This might be coincidental, but let's imagine that it's not coincidental. What would be the idea behind this kind of heavy alliteration throughout the line? For those whom thou thinkst thou dost overthrow.
I may be wrong, but it does slow down the line a bit and it makes it more emphatic, because there's an emphasis on the idea of you think this thing, but it is not really so.
Yes. I'm not Catholic, but it does give a ring of a Catholic church, some sort of prayer or something like that. That's my thought there. Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. There's no space to make all of these notes, but we'll have the recording. So the alliteration, let's say, might add some emphasis, and we have like some hints of Catholicism with like either like a hymn or a chant, or just that kind of spiritual sound.
Does it help to?
Yes, Tessa.
Yeah, does it help to reinforce the perceived power of death? Because these sounds, that TH sounds a bit heavy to me. I don't know. And the thudding sound, like for those whom thou thinkest thou dost overthrow. Yeah, just getting a sense of that power that death has, which he is trying his best. Well, he's trying to veer us away from that and understand that death is in fact not, it has a false sense of grandeur. But in that line, it just kind of reminds me of that first line from Lulugaru, A Curious Tale That Threaded Through the Town, some sense of, the power of this tale, the same way this death is powerful.
That's pretty interesting. You could feel or sense some weight in the alliteration, but it's so interesting how we can have very much opposing ideas of the same sound, but I think our ideas still converge because I sense a very soft subtlety in the TH sound. I think usually in poems, that TH, that soft, almost sibilant sound, it gives the idea of something soft, something gentle like a breeze or some soft emotion. So in my mind, when I'm hearing these soft sounds, it's almost as if the speaker is giving us through the sonics of the poem how we should really feel about death. This kind of bliss. And as someone said, it does slow the line down. So I'm thinking that the alliteration is hinting to us that death is a soft, gentle bird or insect, as opposed to this, dinosaur or titan that we imagine it to be. In any case, we have some good ideas as to what this alliteration might serve to do. It's good to share ideas like these because, of course, there is no one effect or one answer as to what something like alliteration might bring. But at least if students can think that there might be, some deliberateness to the devices, then they might be able to write about them. All right. So, yes, anything else in these lines?
I am just saying that what you just said a while ago, it does make some sense because it does connect with the idea that he says poor death, that he's sort of saying, so the whole idea of saying, you poor thing. So I do see that coming out. So I can make that connection.
Yeah, and I think both sides may be valid because the alliteration can work in a number of ways, and it can work differently for different readers depending on your own experiences and so on. One person might feel one effect, another person might feel another effect, but I think these effects kind of converge to agree with the speaker's point that death should not be proud. For from rest and sleep, which but thy pictures be much pleasure, then from thee much more must flow. These lines tripped me up a little bit in the beginning, but I noticed that this is kind of one idea by itself until we hit this caesura, and then we have like a second, like a part A, part B kind of thing. So part A here, from rest and sleep, which but thy pictures be much pleasure. First of all, what does it mean, from rest and sleep, which but thy pictures be?
Death presents a picture of rest and sleep. If what we are just seeing are the representations of death, when we see somebody sleeping, which is essentially what they look like, when they're dead. So in a sense, again, it's to bring death down, to show that you're not as powerful as you think you are. In fact, ironically, you're pretty good. We like you.
Yeah, I think that's one of the
Yes,
main
that's a good
one of the main points here. Death is trying to be this big bad wolf, but it ends up being a nice warm teddy bear for us to hug, when we get tired, of living. So we can see that there's kind of a metaphor here where death is being understood, where rest and sleep are being understood as pictures of death. So as we look at rest, as we look at sleep, we can get a good image, a good perception of what death is. This is also this whole thing here is a euphemism as well. A euphemism that is often alluded to, biblical allusion and euphemism. This whole idea of death being sleep or being compared to sleep or rest, this is a sentiment that we can see very often throughout the Bible. Rest, death being asleep. So we see here from rest and sleep, which what thy pictures be. So from rest and sleep, the speaker is saying from these two things that we enjoy, we get pleasure from resting and sleeping. I don't think there's anyone who hates resting or sleeping. We have to do it and it benefits us, our bodies, mind, souls. So rest and sleep are beneficial and they give us pleasure. And if rest and sleep are pictures of death, now saying that they're pictures of death is interesting because it doesn't just say that we can get an idea of death by looking at rest and sleep, but it's kind of giving me the idea that rest and sleep are replicas or just photocopies of death.
Yes, that's what I get.
Yeah. So if we can get pleasure from rest and sleep, what much more? Much more. But death is a more intense form of rest and sleep. So if rest and sleep can give us so much pleasure, imagine when we get like the best rest or the best sleep possible, which is death. So of course, death is proud. You see up top here, death is proud because some people call it mighty and dreadful. However, we should not call death mighty or dreadful because we don't find rest and sleep to be mighty or dreadful. We find them to be pleasurable. And if rest and sleep are pleasurable, then death must be much more pleasurable, since death is like a deeper rest or sleep.
So instead of something to be feared, something to be afraid of, mighty and dreadful, it is in fact something that is a source of pleasure, and therefore it's something to be desired again rather than fear. So there's this emphasis always on it is not something to be feared, but something to be desired instead. It's a pretty nice argument. I like it.
Of course. And if we think back to John Donne's time, we're looking at somewhere around the 17th century with the re-emergence of the Black Death, kind of coming out of the Dark Ages. People really needed this message at that time in England. People were desperate to hear of a message in which we could disempower death. Because death was all around, death was a big deal. People were dropping like flies. So John Donne was saying, hey man, don't worry about all of this death, because death is only doing us a favor in the grand scheme of things. Coming from that religious background where once you die, you go to the afterlife. So just as so when you go to sleep, you wake up feeling refreshed. After death, you will wake up feeling refreshed to enjoy eternal life. Now, there are some sound devices that we might need to make mention of before we move on. In this line, first of all, we see some repetition. Much. Of course, we have the emphasis in how much pleasure we can get from death. But even more interesting than the repetition, we have some alliteration of this much from much more must. What might be Don's reason for alliterating this sound as he talks about the pleasure that we can expect to gain from death? Any ideas?
Sorry to jump in, but
Not
when
at all.
something tastes something good and you say,
Yeah.
emphasizes the idea of the pleasure derived from it.
This is actually the exact idea that I got from the alliteration. I thought, death is delicious. Death is delicious. we can get that sense of pleasure from that sound. So even while reading the line, it's like we can taste the pleasure that we can anticipate from death. And while we look at the alliteration,
and just to say one thing, and you don't have to wonder if that is possible, because the line itself, so that is aligns directly with the meaning of the words in the poem, you know, the focus, it draws our attention to what the line is actually saying.
Yes. And I find this example of alliteration easier to analyze than the previous one, because here, with the TH sounds, we didn't have much context to go on, so we had to be, improvising and guessing what it might mean. But here, there's a very direct connection between the device and the line in which the device is sound. So that makes it easier to analyze. Yes,
I agree. That's true.
I was just going to comment. Normally, when you're addressing kings and queens, though, the TH is a kind of thing that you'd use, So here is it that something is mighty and dreadful. So it's possible that because originally that's what people thought, the thee and thou, when you're addressing kings and queens, so there's the idea of thee, thou, that sort of thing. So it is possible that the use of the TH could be linked to that. And of course, to help to emphasize the paradox that you who really think you're mighty, so I'm addressing you as such, but you're not really that.
Well, that would certainly add to the irony of these whole couple of lines where the speaker is just humoring death. So if that is how we want to look at the TH alliteration, then we could say it is used ironically to really show that death is in this delusion that he's powerful, that he's some kind of royalty or some kind of mighty being. So that's a good idea.
And it does kind of match with the line, because it does say, whom thou thinkest thou dost overthrow. So, you think you are powerful. Yeah. So I'm addressing you as such, but you're not really so.
Right. So yeah. That's a good argument for the alliteration, I think. Yeah. And so we have alliteration here, which really adds, however we want to look at it, it helps to support the idea that death thinks it is strong, but it's actually weak. And the alliteration here helps to support the idea that death is something we should embrace rather than fear, because it gives us pleasure. But there's another sound device. Yeah, so when you look at line 6, we also see some assonance, I believe. Somebody mentioned the alliteration slowing down the line in line 3. Look at these long sounds in thee, much more must flow. Any idea as to why the speaker would add this kind of slowness to the end of the line? Much pleasure, then from thee much more must flow. It's almost impossible to read that line without without an emphatic flair. Much more must flow.
You're treasuring the things, so it's almost as if you don't want to let it go easily. When you're eating something and it tastes very good, you take your time eating it. The word
like
is not
like savoring.
Right. Okay.
Yes.
So we have some unity between the alliteration and the assonance, in the sense that they're both savoring the flavor of death. we get that delicious sound from the and then we get savoring the flavor from lengthening out how long we spend on these words. And the long vowel sounds, we see that they're at the end here, right when the flavor is about to run out. The speaker is saying, no man, I need to taste this some more. So essentially, whether we look at the words themselves, the diction, or we look at the sound devices, we see that these lines 5 and 6, are giving us good ideas as to why we should see death as something to enjoy and not something to fear. Any other ideas on these lines before we go down to 7 and 8?
Can I say something? Yeah, just reading the poem. I'm not, well, I mean, we have different interpretations, but I don't necessarily see the poet there exhibiting any kind of likeness or pleasure for death. I think it's some kind of bravado, really. So here you have a speaker who, as you said, contextually, the situation that was happening in England at the time. So the speaker is positioned as someone who is sort of overwhelmed. And so this line is almost like a sort of, I wouldn't say childish taunt at death. So it's like the speaker is trying to muster up all sorts of arguments to kind of convince himself that, death is not all that powerful. So the line there, much pleasure then it's almost as though a child is kind of taunting a bully. And you know that the bully is powerful, but in that attempt to convince the self, you are trying to align all sorts of arguments to kind of cope psychologically. So I don't know if I see it really as any relishing the idea or pleasure that is to be derived from death. I see it as like the speaker trying to align all sorts of arguments to kind of shatter any kind of fear or hold that death might have on him. So I kind of read this poem psychologically. Here you have a speaker who is unable to cope with the impact of death, and then he's, just aligning, but I don't know if it's experiential where he thinks, he has never tasted death. So that's just my take on it, really.
Well, I think does anyone want to respond to that take before I go in?
Well, what I will say is that it is undoubtedly an argument. I mean, there are some things that, depending on how you look at it, you might say that he doesn't experience pleasure. What we don't know, because as you have said, he has not experienced it, but what he is trying to say is that, instead of death being horrific, it instead offers pleasure. So there's the idea of the contrast in order to develop this argument that you don't need to be afraid of death. It might be, yes, arguable that he is doing that because he wants to convince himself or he wants to convince others, but it is an argument. So there is some convincing going on. So that much is clear.
What was pointed out about the psychology or the psychological impact of death, and perhaps, and that is what struck. I don't know. Is it Eddie? I'm not too sure. But anyway, I don't see necessarily a contradiction in that position, because it speaks to the depth of the fear, the psychological impact of death, that yes, call it hyperbole if you wish, or going overboard here in terms of the pleasure and what we were saying about the savoring. But in order to really convince yourself in a situation where you are surrounded by so much death, and you need to not only just reconcile for yourself what's going on, but as a priest to allay people's fears, it certainly does mean that you have to present an argument, a convincing one, and that does come with some level of emphasis and a little hyperbole and a little exaggeration. So I don't necessarily see it as anything contradictory. In fact, it to me complements, if we are to read the line in that light, that yes, he is definitely trying to make an argument, dealing with the whole psychological impact of death and explaining what death is. That one question, or that one universal element of our lives that we grapple with every day to explain. We fear it, we don't understand it, it happens. Well, I know people claim to have died and come back, or have these kinds of experiences, but by and large, none of us really have gone and died and come back to say what it is. So the complexity of it, not knowing the unknown, that whole issue, that psychological issue, is very, very deep. And to be able to deal with it, you perhaps have to engage in a little bit of that, what's happening there in line 6. So for me, it complements. I don't necessarily see it as a contradiction.
I think that's a very good way to look at the idea that the speaker might be trying to convince himself of all of these things. Because when you look at I made a few very badly written notes here in the meantime, in terms of the audience. The speaker is speaking to death. He's speaking to the people who fear death. But of course, we know that there's no way there's no way in which he's not speaking to himself. So we know that the speaker, they only see him as a priest, a religious man, or just a poet. Even if he has a logical understanding of death being weak, he will certainly have the human fear of death that is being in conflict with that. So you can call it bravados. You could say that, he's just pretending to see death in this light. But I think both perceptions happen at once, wherein he knows in the back of his mind, in the logical part of his mind, that death is nothing to fear. But at the same time, if somebody holds a gun to your head, you're going to panic. You're not going to say, well, death be not proud, and just relax. That human instinct is going to kick in. And so I think the speaker is trying to balance this innate fear of death. He's trying to balance this out with the kind of overstating how weak death is. So he's going overboard to balance the equation.
Over exaggeration.
Right.
Yes.
Just to, counterbalance the natural fear, because fearing death is natural. Fearing death is normal. We should fear death. Otherwise, we might die more easily if we have no fear of death. And so the speaker is operating as a human. And from that standpoint, the speaker is human as well. So he's not exempt from that natural fear of death. So in order to fear death less, we have to go overboard in thinking about how weak death might actually be. So I don't think it's a matter of like a pretense. I think it's just a coping mechanism that the speaker uses to try to understand the powerlessness of death.
Or try to deal, because there is a grappling with death here, it's a reasoning. Here's a situation where you're talking about death. You're trying to grapple with what some persons have said and trying to be rational, and reason why it should not be fearful. Why others shouldn't be afraid, including possibly yourself.
Of course, especially himself. He's not exempting himself from the poem. He also talks about his own, idea of what death is. And what is interesting is most poems about death, especially sonnets, are very emotional poems. They're about people dealing with grief or loss, even acceptance, people dealing with resignation. In this poem, the speaker is trying to veer away from the emotional framework of talking about death, and he's employing a very logical approach. Look at even lines 5 and 6. From XYZ, then XYZ. If A, then B. It's a very structured argument against death. Death, do not be proud. I have these 6 main points. Point A, he explains. Point B, he explains. So he's trying to, in a sense, use logic to overpower the emotional fear that, of course, even he himself would have of death. So I think this appeal to logic, it's really trying to balance the more natural way of looking at death, which is an emotional way. Because we don't look at death in a logical way. We look at death in an emotional way. Death brings suffering and grief. It ends life. So the speaker is saying, let us try to science death out. Let's look at it in this way. And if we look at it in this way, maybe we'll fear it less. So you could see it as the speaker tricking himself into thinking that death is weak by going overboard. Or you could just see it as the only way in which to see that death is powerless. This is the only way in which it can be done. Perhaps that could be it as well.
And this is something that Don has done before, in his poetry, that he does try to bring up arguments that may not always necessarily be the strongest, but they are very logical. You would come to that sort of conclusion.
And so far, his arguments are both strong and logical because he's saying we know about rest, we know about sleep, we know they give us pleasure. That's a fact. We know that death is a deeper state of rest and sleep. That's a fact. Therefore, death must bring even greater pleasure. So the speaker is, I think, doing a good job of using logic to
Yes,
try to convince whether us or himself that death should not be feared. Yeah.
Just one comment here, if I may jump in.
Of course.
This is Janet Charles from St. Lucia. So,
welcome.
I'm just wondering if at any point is he humoring death when he says, "From thee much more pleasure must flow." So death, you think you're really big and bad, but in fact, you just really bring us pleasure. So is he humoring death there at all? And also in line 3, you spoke about the alliteration here. So I'm thinking he's drawing us to the point that there is a throne to be discussed here. A throne to be discussed. And if somebody is being overthrown, it means that death isn't the real king who sits upon the throne, he's in the appointed king to sit upon the throne. The one appointed and chosen is not death. So I'm just wondering, yes, about that here.
Interesting. That's I think a good observation, especially seeing that overthrow is kind of a peculiar word. That's another way in which we can understand it. Yeah. Good, very good points. Very good points. So yeah, the speaker is in a sense humoring death, giving death praise in a kind of ironic, sarcastic way, just mocking death because you're here trying to be this monster, but look at you giving us pleasure. This kind of tone. So I think that's where the speaker is going with these lines. All right. How about we jump to line 7? And soonest our best men with thee do go. I think this should be a clear line. You see death taking us to the afterlife, but who specifically goes with death, or at least who goes with death? Soonest. Who are the best men?
Might it be soldiers? That's what came to my mind. Or
yeah, I was thinking of soldiers as well.
Why would it be soldiers?
Well, when we think of best men, in terms of war, we think of the people who go out there and fight for their country as good men, men of valor and strength. They are certainly elevated in the minds of people. There would have been, I guess, wars and turmoil, conflicts that would have taken, some young men. Even is it Powden or Owen? Which one was the one that was in the war? The young soldier, and he died.
From Dolce?
Yes, you're right. Yes.
Dolce the Economist, that poem?
Yes, he was a poet. Well, he was
Owen, Wilfred Owen.
In the war. Owen, right.
Oh, gotcha.
So, so that's why soldiers came to mind. And in terms of soonest, that they would die young. So that's why I came up with soldiers.
I just want to agree with her because the whole idea of our best men, we're thinking of men who we value more than others, men who we normally think of and applaud more than others. And these are the ones that most times when people think of good men, you think of soldiers in terms of what they do for our country. So yes, I think it's a reasonable conclusion.
I will say when I first read it, best men, to me, I just thought of a class structure and whoever we see as best from the highest to the lowest, they are the ones who will go. And soonest, I don't think in terms of time, he's just saying in terms of life. Sooner or later, that's how I interpreted that soonest, these best men will go. Or in other words, we all have to go there, from those on the top to those on the bottom. We are all heading in that direction.
All right. I think the best men here, This line has some interesting
I
interpretations.
see what you wrote there, Adam. Yeah, that can certainly work.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think it.
Righteous
Yeah,
men.
I think it could
Yes,
work, but
yes,
it doesn't
yes.
exclude soldiers,
it
though.
doesn't. It doesn't. It might
But
be
I
an
understand. Yes,
yeah.
I can see
But
that too.
I I thought of soldiers, but I thought that the priority of this phrasing would be the righteous men. Seeing the background of the poet, he's talking about death carrying us to the afterlife, which of course would be heaven in his idea, in his mind. So I'm wondering if the God takes the righteous away from the sinful world first as a like a kind of
Yeah,
reward.
that makes sense. Yeah.
It could be soldiers because literally they go soonest. They die young. If they're out there fighting, they're likely to die at a younger age. And the soonest here is the soonest here might be
Yeah,
a little
because we
tricky.
do console ourselves with that line when young people die,
Mm.
or good people die. God only takes the
Yeah,
best.
that's what
You hear
came to
that
mind.
line.
That's what
Yes.
came to mind.
So
God takes the best first. And we're wondering, how is it that wicked people live so long and righteous people die early? And we tell ourselves that this is their reward. They get to leave this sinful earth faster than others. It's not a perfect argument because all of the righteous men live to be 100. So that couldn't
No,
necessarily
but
be the only
it is
argument.
correct that that is a
Hmm.
general argument that people
Hmm.
have. Normally, they say that God has taken the quote unquote God takes them because they're good and takes them to a better place, even though bad people die too. But it
Hmm.
is an argument. But the whole idea is that I like what you're trying to do is that you're not limiting it, because the whole idea is that those best men are people valued, those love, whether they are righteous, but the persons who are
Right.
valued in society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so whether you want to see them as soulless, righteous men, or both, righteous men are in a sense soulless, aren't they? In one sense, the soonest men. The point is, death is a reward given to those who deserve it, even first. They get it even sooner than others. And the soonest here is interesting because it might be soonest in our minds, wherein if someone who I consider a best man dies even at age 120, it's going to still be soon for me. It's going to be too soon. So it might just be a matter of perspective where, regardless of age and actual time spent on earth, whenever someone who is good, whenever someone who is righteous, whenever someone who is well known or well loved dies, it's always too soon, even if they're old. It's not as if we're saying, well, she was 80, so it's time now. You're still going to grieve. You're still going to say why she couldn't get 5 more years. So death will still take the best men soonest. Whether young or old, the soonest might still be in our mind because the death always comes too soon for those who we consider to be the best. So it could be in that sense as well. Does that make sense? No?
Yes, yes.
yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that could be the idea. That could be the soonest.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So and soonest yeah, we see that the best men die early, and soonest our best men with the to go rest of their bones. And this is one of my favorite lines. It might seem random why I like this line. Line 8. Rest of their bones and souls delivery. Any comments on this line before I share my thoughts on it? Rest of their
Just that
bones.
their life is dreary and difficult, and then when you die you have no more. I mean, it's just connecting with the idea of sleep and rest that you get when you die. You get the opportunity to rest and relax, and of course the soul's delivery, as you've pointed out, you're saved, you're delivered from, basically, again, the whole idea of escaping this difficult, wicked world.
Mm. Yeah. So we see that death kind of offers a reprieve to both body and soul. The rest of their bones. We know that bones here, when we die, our bones stop moving, but the bones speak to the physical existence, not just the literal bones. So it's kind of a synecdoche, that kind of weird device that pops up, which might be like a subset of metaphor. But it's a synecdoche because the bones are representing something of which they are a part, which is our physical existence. So the rest of their bones, these best men and everyone else who dies, their bones get to rest, and their souls. Does death bring rest to our soul as well? That's an interesting question. We see that the bones get rest. Does the soul get rest from death?
Can that not be just a reference to eternal life?
Certainly. But I'm saying death can give our bones rest. It can give our physical bodies rest, but can it give our souls rest as well?
Yes.
Yes.
If you're best, if you're best of the best, you'll get the rest, you'll get the delivery. I guess you'll not go into purgatory or hell. But yeah, it doesn't guarantee that. If to answer your question.
Well, I think rest.
So, yes. I think so, yes.
You think so? Mm-hmm. Annette? Go on. Who was it? Was it Tessa?
No, it's me.
No, it was.
I am saying that I agree that it would provide your soul with rest. And I'm thinking that because he was a man of the cloth, so to speak, in some ways, yes, it brings soul's delivery. If it is you believe, you hold on to that Christian view that you will be resting with God. So there is. That's so, yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
I was thinking that, because he's making an argument and everything is connected. If it gives pleasure, then the whole idea is that even spiritually you are to rest in death. The whole idea that there's some deliverance, and that's why I spoke about life as a struggle, a trial, and then when you die now, there is a rest from that. You're no longer dealing with these difficulties, and so it is a rest. You sleep, and so I was thinking of it in that context.
Okay, I'm not 100% convinced that my question has been answered, but
I'm sorry, I'm not seeing who had spoken before just a while ago.
Yeah,
we made a comment.
We were just saying, does
I'm just saying I'm agreeing with, but I couldn't. I wanted to reference her name, but I'm not too sure. But I agree with whoever. Yeah, who just spoke.
Annette. Okay.
That was Annette. Okay. Yes. That's how I see
or
it.
Or Kerry.
Oh, is it Kerry?
It might have been what Kerry said.
Okay. Because for me, again, it's in keeping with the argument. We're making a case against death. You think you're so great, or so terrifying. What you're actually doing is bringing us pleasure or doing good things for us. And in that line 8, you are providing us with physical rest, and it could be from a long illness. And again, it's in keeping with the way we console ourselves with death, that the person has died, they're now at peace, there in terms of there's no more physical pain. But the soul's delivery, for me, I didn't really see it as whether or not the soul is at rest. It's just simply a matter of, this is the way in which the soul gets delivered from the mortal existence on earth. That's the only way the soul can actually be delivered out of that body, because while you're alive, it's in the body, and death is the vehicle, that mechanism which really brings us to that part of our existence that we really ought to be focusing on, because that's the ultimate goal here. It's not this life, but the afterlife. Death is the only the mechanism by which this can happen, where you can be transported, into this other world. So it actually does a good thing. Without death, your soul is still captured in this mortal existence on earth. So
Thank you. I think Tessa came the closest to kind of agreeing with my idea of the line in that death has the power to give our body rest. You know, death has power over the body. Even in the Bible, death is given that much credit. Yes, it can kill the body. But I don't think, I might be splitting hairs, but I don't think death has the power to give our soul rest. Instead, death can only deliver us to that rest that we are expecting. So death, so we're seeing the body and the soul here, right? The body and the soul. We're seeing how death affects both entities. The body is dead. You know, this rest is a euphemism. The body dies, decays, becomes dust. The soul is not given rest by death, in my opinion. The soul doesn't get to relax and sleep. Death has a job to do. Death is now a delivery man. Body gets some rest, soul, time to go. So I think the soul in this line isn't getting rest, but is simply being moved to that place where it can then eternally rest. It might not make a big difference in terms of, I see a hand raised. You can just jump in. You can just jump in. I don't mind being interrupted.
Yes,
Go ahead.
Adam, good night. This is Marlene from the TCI.
Thank you,
Now,
Marlene.
Adam, with death, that's when the soul leaves the body. Okay? And I believe the persons who are the righteous men that were referenced earlier, if you are righteous, then you get to that place of rest. But then if you're not, then maybe you would be tormented.
Maybe that's why he used delivery, because
Delivered to where?
Yes, he kept it open so that your
Delivered to
body
where?
for sure resting,
Yeah.
but your delivery
Yeah, that's what I'm
is
saying.
where either heaven or hell, or
That's what I'm saying.
where you going. So
Yeah.
he's specific in
Exactly.
putting
So the
it
soul isn't
open as
necessarily
delivery.
resting. Yeah. The body is resting, whether good, evil, or in between. Your body will get some good rest. But the soul, death is not giving the soul rest here, I think. It's just delivering the soul to wherever. Maybe rest, maybe not. That's how I think this line is playing up. That's what I think. But either way could be a valid way to look at it. But in any case, I want us to... Yes, someone was saying something else.
Yeah, the whole idea of delivery though is to rescue something, you know, or are you saying that the delivery is just to move, to carry the soul to somewhere else?
Yeah, I think that is the primary meaning. Not necessarily being rescued, but being transported. I think so. It might be, if we're looking at the best men's experience, then the delivery could be that positive being rescued from this world of sin. But if you're looking at death for everyone and the rest that we will all get, then the delivery might just be the transportation to wherever. So it might depend on the connection that we want to make between lines 7 and 8. Between the best men and...
When you rest and you sleep, why is it pleasurable?
Well, you're not doing anything. Doing anything feels good.
And then if you're not resting and sleeping, what are you doing? You're most times working, struggling.
Yeah.
So that's how I drawn that kind of conclusion that there is some sort of resting of the soul. But I do see what you're saying. But there is the idea that there's something positive that it does for your soul also, as well as the body.
Yeah, I think the word delivery, whether we want to see it as transportation or rescue, is more positive than negative. But the word delivery here is... I sometimes I wonder if I overthink what these poets are saying, but that's kind of what we're here to do. But the word delivery here offers an interesting pun, because we I have a son and I can remember the delivery room, because that wasn't so long ago. So while we're saying that perhaps death brings rest to the soul, it might even be the opposite, wherein death brings rest to the soul, rest to the bones, but life delivery has to do with like birth now in this connotation that I'm referencing. You know, a baby being delivered, being born. So the delivery here could speak to like the birth at death. If you get what I'm
just
saying.
to cut in here a little bit. So you're suggesting, therefore, and then this would be a contrast being in this line, that at the same time it does bring rest to the bones, then it gives birth to something else. So it is
right,
taking something, putting something to rest, and also giving birth to something. That's
right,
what
or providing the means by which something can be birthed, which is the eternal life. So I think that the speaker is saying.
I think I like that idea.
You like that idea? Oh, good. I like
And
it very
Adam,
much. Yes.
Adam, can we say in cultures where you have reincarnation, can that apply as well?
I think it would be an even more interesting application, because you're being delivered. Because with reincarnation, in a literal sense, death equals birth. You're reborn. So we can imagine that when death comes, it's just you being born again in that sense. So whether it is being reincarnated, being physically born into another life form, even another species, another entity, whatever the case is, or you're being born again in the sense that you're not going to live eternally in heaven or wherever. I think the delivery here is not necessarily talking about the rest of the soul, but really the birth, or like the new activity that the soul will be able to enjoy. So the body dies. This is like the speaker is saying, you know what, death, I'm going to give you one thing. You do kill the body. I'm not going to take that from you. It's being logical, so he's giving credit where credit is due. But you cannot give my soul rest. The only thing you can do is give my soul more life. So that might be an interesting way in which to frame how death approaches body and soul. Just some ideas. Just some ideas. But yeah, the word delivery here is quite interesting, because while we're talking about death, the delivery also means birth, being born. So it's interesting. And we see that in line 13, we're going to get there eventually. We see the death, and we see the delivery, the life, the birth, the waking. So I think either way could be fine. Whether one is see it as the soul being given rest, being given transportation, or being given birth. I think all interpretations could be defended properly.
Whatever the point, that is not stealing us from going on to better things. That,
right.
I think is the point.
We all agree on that, regardless of the details of the line.
Yeah,
we know that
a positive impact.
It's a positive outcome. That's right. Death is giving more than it can take. And that however one is split here with delivery, we're making a profit from death in the end. It takes the bones, it gives us eternal life. I take that trade off. That's a good trade. All right, let's see what's happening in line 9. When we look at form later, I keep saying later on. I wonder how much later there is. Yes, go on, Eddie.
Yeah, I like the interpretation you have on the pun there. The delivery could actually be that kind of transporting, and then the idea of newness onto better things. And when you look at it structurally, he's coming, this is the octave. So from line 1 down to line 8 here, you have this kind of ironic undercutting of the apparent superiority of death. But then, not that I'm hastening the process, but
no, not
when you
at
look
all.
at the text, you're going to see a shift. I'm wondering if you're going to pick, I won't say the shift that I have seen, but that delivery there. Yeah, you notice the exclamation is there at the end of the octave. The idea is I've used all of these arguments in an ironic way to show you that you're not powerful. And then now, when you examine the tested, I'm seeing a shift, but I don't want to bias the argument. I'm just going to wait.
I'm happy that you mentioned the stanza outline of octet sestet, because that's how What are these things? Sonnets are structured. Interestingly, I have a very, very different idea of how this particular sonnet is structured. I think we don't have the regular octet sestet outline, but we look at form at the end because we're spending more time on this poem than the others because the form of the poem is very telling. You know, when looking at sonnets, we have no choice but to do a deep dive into the form. It was a similar case with God's Grandeur. There was one more sonnet composed. So now that the students have the students have multiple sonnets, so they might be able to compare how sonnets are used. Anyway, we're going to look at the form later. So why don't we jump to line 9? And line 9 is interesting where the form is concerned, but we'll look at the form aspect in a little. Don't get sleepy, guys. For me, it's only 11:30 a.m., so please take that morning energy. Stay awake. So line 9, thou art slave to fate, chance, kings, and desperate men. What's going on here? I have some interesting ideas about this line. What do you guys think about line 9?
Death is just a servant.
Yeah, or a slave, to put it more
slave,
sharply.
yeah. Yeah. It does the bidding of these other people. You know, it waits on them. They're really in control. They can, I mean, you have fate. These are all, well, this is how I see it. These are elements that can bring about death. Death doesn't have any power on its own. But, you know, these are the people or the things which have the power, and they manipulate death to their means, to their ends. So fate will cause death to happen to you. Chance can do that. Kings can create wars or off with your head, as in Henry VIII and his wives, and desperate men who want to either kill or rob or take their own lives. So, you know, death is not something that happens on its own. It's an agent of these other elements. That's how I see it.
Wow, that's brilliant. Yeah. Someone else was adding, carry on.
Yes, I was just saying, you know, he slowly brings him down. So you're not this powerful, mighty person, but in fact, you are, you know, just someone who has to answer to others. You know, you're used by others, so to speak, as my colleague just nicely explained.
Yeah.
So here again, the contrast, this contrasts nicely with the king, because if you're not king, mighty, powerful, then, you know, a nice opposite is a slave. Instead of others being subject to you, you are subject to others.
Yeah, he's flipping the script on death. All right, that's good. I understand that line to mean all of this. But there are some interesting details in this line. So we see here there are 4 masters of death. Because if death is a slave, these are the masters, the enablers of death. Death can't do anything by itself. Death only has to jump how high when these people talk. So death is a slave to. Let's look at the 4 masters. Let's look at the 4 masters. First, we have fate. Well, the first 2, fate and chance. We know that fate and chance are, mysterious, universal phenomena. We talk about death, we talk about fate, we talk about chance. Now, fate and chance are opposites, which I find to be interesting. Why would the speaker list 2 opposing masters of death? We know that fate is what is meant to happen to you. It's a destiny, it's inescapable. Whereas chance is just something that happens for no reason, just out of luck or happenstance. So I think by showing us these 2 opposites, it's like we're seeing the whole spectrum of the masters of death. From fate to chance, from careful calculation of the universe or of God to the roll of dice. It's almost as if he's showing us the long range. And another interesting thing, I think it was Karen who said that this line brings death down. But how the line brings death down is very interesting, because it's a gradual degradation of death. When you look at how the masters of death are listed, number one, we have fate. Number two, we have chance. Number three, we have kings. Number four, we have desperate
Adam,
men.
do you see the same thing happening with kings and desperate men?
With
A spectrum is being introduced as
Of
well.
course, as a matter of fact, from faith down to desperate men. So we see a contrast here with faith and chance, and we see a similar contrast with kings and desperate men, where we have great, we have small. We have, in a sense, great and small on a different scale. But looking from number one to number four, they're going like in order of greatness and renown. Faith on this list of masters of death is the most powerful. Fate is the inescapable, the destiny. Fate is what God says is going to happen. Chance is still quite strong, at least compared to humans, but not as powerful as faith. Then we have kings, the strongest human master of death. And then we have the despicable, these men who kill and plunder and kill themselves, the desperate. So we're seeing that from great to small, we're all in control of death. Whether you're human, non-human, whether you're a great human or a small human, from the greatest to the smallest, we are all in control of death and not the other way around. We are who determine when and how death can occur. Later on, we'll see that other things enable death as well. But death is never ever in a position to make a decision about who dies and how they die and when. So I think that the ordering or the ranking of the masters of death is very interesting. I think so. What other devices can we see? There's a little bit of assonance here. A slave to fate, chance, with those long kind of sounds, which I think kind of it lengthens this first part kind of to build the anticipation before we get to the more interesting masters, which are humans. Because the speaker's point is that humans are masters over death. So that might be an effect there. So a little bit of assonance. And we see some contrast in faith and chance and in kings and desperate men. Yeah. Any other observation about line 9 before we go to line 10?
Yeah, there's something I picked up there. Well, the poem is an apostrophe, really. And again, stylistically, like I said, even though the entire poem is about disempowering death, whether psychologically or from whatever perspective, you notice here at the beginning of the set that thou is in the first, it's the first word in the line. So there is a sense now, I think his tone has shifted and the imagery that he uses from line 9 there, all the way down to the end is highly negative. The whole idea of you being a mere servant, you dwell with things that are despicable, distasteful, and so it's almost like here I am trying to disempower you or to shake your hold on me, really. But the thou here is what is significant in my mind. In shifting the tone, he's upping his ante with a total different set of imagery to end with a bang, so to speak. So, typically, you use the sestet to kind of solidify your point, but the image shift is great. It's what I think he uses to kind of solidify his point. So he has one aim, but he does it. There's a lot of stylistic variation in terms of how he tries to, shatter this notion of death being powerful. He uses that kind of, juxtaposed imagery, so to speak. So I'm thinking the thou there at the beginning, there is this the apostrophe effect is really foregrounded there.
By calling death a slave, he actually takes away his freedom. He chains death. So he limits death's power immediately.
So we're going even deeper with the powerlessness of death. So now death is not just a servant. We see death is a servant up here, giving us all these nice rest and whatnot. But death is now a slave, which is even lower than a servant. All right. That's an interesting observation as well. Let's look at what happens in line 10. Line 10. And thus doth poison, war, and sickness dwell. I think this is a good continuation from line 9. Now we're seeing the company, someone said despicable, the despicable company that death keeps. And I think it is also implied that poison, war, and sickness act as more just, it's like an addition of masters to death, because these are what enable death. Poison enables death, war enables death, sickness enables death, just as fate, chance, kings, and desperate men. Pretty simple line, perhaps. So we go to 11, 12. 11, 12. And popular charms can make us sleep as well. What are the poppies and charms? What is the poppy and charm?
Some kind of drug.
Yeah, the poppy.
Some drugs.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Or you can be. What do they do? When they. I'm thinking of charms in terms of when you hypnotize. I don't know. That potions, anything like that. That can have that same sleep effect, which we had, and this is an echo of the earlier line about. Well, I'm not seeing it now. The line sleep and rest pictures. Yeah, that reminds us of that earlier line.
Okay. So we see sleep and rest being pictures of death, and now we see poppy and charms. But poppies and charms are used in an even stronger sense, because these are not just pictures of death, but these are like better alternatives to death. In that, if it is that you want to sleep, we don't even need you, Mr. Death, because we can get sleep by using poppy, and the poppy seeds were refined to make opium, these narcotic drugs. You can use these drugs to fall into a deep sleep. And charms, whether it be spells or magical pendants or rings or whatever, these things can make men sleep. So the idea is you have one job, Death. You make us sleep. But you're not even the best at that one job, because if we want sleep, I don't even need to turn to you. I can get better sleep from poppy, from charms. They can make us sleep as well. But not only do they make us sleep as well, but they make us sleep even better than you can. So it's more degradation for death, where we're seeing that death is not even effective at the one thing that it does, because there are other man-made alternatives that can do it even better. So the stroke of death, what do you think about this word? Why is death's touch said to be a stroke? Yeah, unexpected.
It's something that happens unexpectedly, suddenly. So that's what I take from stroke.
Could be, yeah.
And better than in other words, the way that death will strike or touch you, or
or hit you.
Mm-hmm. All right, so yeah, the stroke is sudden, and in this sense, poppies and charms are better, because we can more easily go to sleep when and how we want to sleep using poppy or charms, while death is, a little bit less refined. It's more random. And another idea I got when I saw stroke was Gentle. Gentle touch. A stroke is a gentle touch, a caressing touch. So again, death is euphemized and seen as this force. This goes back to the alliteration I mentioned, the effect I got from the TH. Death is seen as something that gives pleasure, rest, something that is gentle, not something that is monstrous. So the touch of death is just a stroke, just a caress. And this caress can be outmatched by puppy and charms.
Okay.
Yeah, that's my idea. But either way would be good. Yeah, either way is fine, I think. And then we have this nice rhetorical question, in essence, why are you still proud? After seeing all the evidence that I have outlined, after seeing everything that you can't do, I mean, why is it that you're so proud? Of course, we know why he's proud, because people still consider death to be powerful. But the rhetorical question is even for us as well. Why do you continue to see death as a king, even while I'm saying all of this? Because even though we see that death is being personified, we know that we are also the audience of this sermon. So whatever is being, we are eavesdropping on the speaker's conversation to death. Not with death, but to death, because death cannot reply. So we are meant to hear all of this. So everything that's being targeted toward death is also targeted toward us to reshape our idea of death. And we have the final lines. One short sleep past, we wake eternally, and death shall be no more. Death thou shalt die. Any ideas? Any devices that come out in these lines?
Well, for me, the sestet here is sort of, replete with biblical analogies. Actually, I see a lot of intertextuality, and someone had alluded to Don being, a man of the cloth. So you can see the scriptural analogies there. If you are familiar with the Bible, oftentimes the scriptures talk about death, where is your sting, the victory. There is this whole allusion to, Jesus lightning death to sleep, and then the whole idea of the life after death that is exposed in the scripture. And death thou shalt die, there is a scripture that emphatically says that God is going to swallow death forever. Just like the apostrophe that functions as a sort of framing device, the intertextuality sort of becomes more pronounced in the sestet here. So he draws on his, clerical knowledge or his scriptural knowledge to kind of solidify that you are going to. And it's interesting that he goes very scriptural in the sestet. So that is the ultimate. The Bible is the authority. So there is a strong Christian overtone in the sestet, which you don't see in the octave really. So stylistically, really, really good.
Yeah. And of course, we know that lines 13 and 14 are really reinforcements of the reason why death should not be proud. If you're just a short sleep, then why on earth would you be proud? If we're going to wake up after you strike us, then why would you be proud? You're not permanent. And if you, this is, I think, the most interesting part. If you yourself is gonna die, so you're gonna be a victim to yourself, a victim of yourself, then why are you so high and mighty? And yeah, we have biblical allusion coming in, and it's not explicitly stated that it's a biblical allusion, so it could just allude to general religious doctrine that really speak to there being life after death. That is like one of the main unifying understandings that bring religions together. We all believe that this isn't all there is. So death you shall die, so there's no reason to be so mighty. We see some contrast happening between the short sleep and the eternal line here in this same line. And what I find very interesting, a little piece of the form, when you look at the words and their syllables in line 13. One, short, sleep, past, we, wake. All monosyllabic words, one syllable, one. And what is the only word with multiple syllables? Eternally. So we're seeing the difference here, even in the words, even in the sonics of the words, we're seeing the shortness of the sleep being juxtaposed with the length of the
line
eternity.
14 too.
And in line 14, and death shall be no more. We see kind of this longer section, and then
thou shalt die.
That's the final nail in death's coffin, so to speak. Death thou shalt die. All right, I think we've covered.
I like that. I like that there'll be nothing. I like that there'll be nothing left for death to do in the end but self-destruct.
Exactly. And you know what's even funnier than that? You said self-destruct. Death is actually the only one who really dies, because we don't die, we wake. So the only person that actually dies in the end is the person who thinks it is killing, which is very ironic. There are so many ironies to draw from here, because we sleep while the one who claims to kill is the only one who really dies, because death will not be resurrected. Death will not have an eternal life to look forward to. So we see here that the fate that death has planned for us is really the fate that is planned out for death, by God. So a very interesting and a very logical point, I believe. It's very logical, very logical. Let's look just for a second on the structure, just for a few minutes, and perhaps if anyone's still awake, we can just breeze over the other two new poems. Okay, let me find a fresh copy of this. Death be not proud to me. All right, so we're expecting an Italian sonnet. Italian. My handwriting is this bad in real life as well. It's not just because it's virtual. This is how everything looks. In the Italian sonnet, there are two main things that we can look forward to. We can look forward to 14 lines, which we have. We have 1 through 14. And we can look forward to a particular rhyme scheme. We should have 3 chunks or 4 chunks that kind of give us 2 main sections. So usually we have, I'm going to use the yellow highlighter to show what usually happens in the sonnet. Usually we have a break here where we have the octave and the sestet. The octave should give us a scheme. Let's see if I can remember this.
A, B, B,
A. Yeah, we should have A, B, B, A, and then another A, B, B, A. And then for the sestet, we should have, I think it's C, D, C, D, C, D. We should have. So this isn't what obtains, but what should be. So this is the regular rhyme scheme, right, of a sonnet, an Italian sonnet. However, we see that the first part...
You have to change a bit. Let me see.
What should I change?
C, D, D, C.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not annotating this rhyme scheme,
Okay.
I'm writing what usually obtains.
What usually, okay.
Usually in the sonnet we have A, and this is fine. We have the A, we have the A, and the same here. The, me, be, delivery. We have the so, throw, flow, go. But here it is quite different. Instead of having C, D, C, D, C, D, what we really have happening here is we have
another A, B, B, A.
Is it A again? Man, we can start a new one. And let's call it C, D, D, C.
Or C, D, D, C.
And then we have an E, E.
Yeah.
So this is interesting because sonnets don't usually break their form, at least not the rhyme scheme. We expect a sonnet to look like a sonnet. So we have to ask, why is it that Donne decided to make such a drastic change? And first of all, let's look at why or the functions that the rhyme scheme has. The rhyme scheme breaks up the poem into sections. So we have one section of ABBA, and we have another section of ABBA, and these are quatrains of enclosed rhymes, enclosed because we start with one rhyme and we end with that same rhyme. And then we should have a sestet of alternate rhymes, CD, CD, CD. However, what we find is rather a third section of enclosed rhymes here. This is what we find, a third section of enclosed rhymes. So instead of moving on to the alternate rhyme, CD, 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 Donne says, no, we're not done with section 1 yet. I need more time. So he elongates the first section by giving us another quatrain of enclosed rhymes. And then he gives us EE. Eternally was pronounced eternal lie, so technically it would have rhymed with die, giving us the EE. So
thank you for that explanation.
yes,
Because I was wondering.
we might have been one. I wondered as well. That's why with these old points, I like to check what it was before what it is in terms of the pronunciations. So what happens here is the volta of the poem, the point at which the poem turns, should be here by what is normal for a sonnet. But I think Donne is trying to tell us to look here. That's what I think. I could be wrong, but I think Donne is saying my volta is here. It's not where it usually is because I'm giving you a long section 1 and then a short section 2. And I do see a volta here because lines 13 and 14 I think are a conclusion or like a conclusive answer as to why death should not be proud. We know that in the sonnet we have one long section that presents either a question or a problem, and the short section, which should be the sestet, which is in this case a couplet, that provides an answer or a solution. And I think if we break up the poem here, we have a perfect poem. The problem is death is proud. The question is, why are you proud? We did find even an actual rhetorical question. Why soilst thou then? The answer is, after one short sleep we'll wake eternally. That is the answer to the problem of death's pride. In other words, this is why death should not be proud. The problem is also that there's another problem in the poem. Some have called thee mighty. People fear death. That's a problem. What is the answer? The answer is this. The answer is this. Death shall die, so there's no reason to fear it. We shall wake eternally, so there's no reason to worry about the permanence of death because death is temporary. So I think the rhyme scheme forces us to change where the poem usually makes its break. That's what I think. There are arguments that can be made for a division here, but I see a much stronger division here instead. And I think the rhyme scheme supports that because here we have one section of 12 lines of the enclosed rhymes, ABBA, ABBA, CDDC, and then this is different, a couplet that ends the poem. What do you guys think about the rhyme scheme and the form? Do you agree that the volta is shifted from the regular position, or can we make good arguments for the volta being here between lines 8 and 9? Or could it be a strange mix of both ideas?
I think there's an emphasis on those last two lines, and it does offer his conclusion, his closing arguments that this is the sum of it all. And so therefore, that is why he has made it that way, so that the focus is on those two lines, that at the end of it all, this is what death shall happen to death. We, and of course, made the focus on the comparison that what shall happen to us versus death. And of course, death shall die. So I do see that coming out, that those last two lines are emphasized. They are differentiated from the rest of the lines.
Yeah, I think there's strong evidence. And while we won't necessarily expect our students to do such a deep dive into the form, because on their essays they won't necessarily have to write about the poem's form, but understanding this might help them to internalize the poem and remember key points. Because thinking of a poem in blocks, for example, we have this block here, this block here, this block here, it will help them to almost be able to recite the poem because they're remembering what each section is about. So looking at the form, maybe it doesn't matter if they're able to talk about the rhyme scheme, but at least understanding the functions of each segment might be good, especially where sonnets are concerned. Looking at line 14, there's like a double conclusion here. Usually a poem about death that tries to end in such a profound way would have maybe like just this or just this. But we're seeing like it's almost as if Don wanted to add a 15th line. And death shall be no more. Because this is a conclusion, isn't it? We could end right there. But then we also have this one, death thou shalt die. I would
So I'm sorry, it's almost like he's killing death too.
Yeah, killing death twice.
Yes, and he has, because he's undermining death, putting death down, then we have to rise above it. We are no longer subject to it, where he's showing that in essence we are better than it. We are we have no need to fear then, because we shall wake, as you've pointed out, and there's a contrast between death itself, which shall actually die.
Yeah. And
I have something to say.
Yes, Eddie.
All right. I don't know if the emphasis, I don't know if the last two lines, the emphasis is so much on the rhyme. I think it's on the lineation. You notice both lines carry a caesura.
Yes.
And it's also antithetical.
Yes.
One short sleep pass, we wake eternally. And death shall be no more. Death thou shalt die. So I think the emphasis is on the internal structuring of the line rather than the end rhyme. Because when you look at eternally or eternal lie, if that's the aim, and die, I really I'm getting a kind of para-rhyme effect. Just looking at it without sounding, it would seem like a sort of para-rhyme, really. Yeah, I don't know if I would, well, I mean, I don't see the ending. I don't see him emphasizing the rhyme as so much the use of the caesura in both lines and the kind of antithetical balancing that you have there. So A, B kind of thingy. So that's just it for me. So look at the idea in the line. One short sleep pass, wake, sleep, wake. And death shall be no more. Death thou shalt die. So the kind of euphemistic versus the actual direct statement there. So that's just what I'm picking up. There is A, B, kind of A, B. So death shall be no more. I'm going to end with you're going to die. So I might be euphemistic in the first part, but I'm coming very direct. I'm being very blunt. I'm being very emphatic. So that's what I'm picking up on.
All right, that's a good thing to pick up on. You mentioned the caesuras here in lines 13 and 14, but oh boy, I've already made a lesson on this poem, and I go quite deeply into the form. I talk about the caesuras and the enjambments, but what I just want to mention briefly as we end this poem is there are three kind of hard caesuras. Here, we have a semicolon just begging for attention. We have one here, and we have one here. But I want us to look at the line 14 caesura for right now. And death shall be no more. Pause. death thou shalt die. I mentioned earlier that it's as if John Donne wanted a 15th line, kind of to make two separate conclusions. I was wondering, how is it that this poem is trying to end? I mean, the first part of the line is agreeing with the second part, and it's agreeing with line 13, but they both sound like an ending. And it didn't sit well with me. Why does it that the poem sounds as if it ends, and death shall be no more? Full stop, let's go home. That sounds like the poem ends. And also, death thou shalt die. It gives a two resolute conclusions. And then I have the caesura, which even gives more separation between the 2 points, as if we should look at them individually. I'm giving you two conclusions that you need to consider separately. And another thing that I found very interesting, I'm not sure if this is the case in all editions of the poem, but in my edition, in the editions I have seen, there is a very interesting decapitalization of death right here. Do you have this in your version, but maybe the World of Poetry version? Wondering, why is it that after coming all this way to personify death, give him a capital D just to show that you're just a name? You're not so much a phenomenon anymore, just a person. Why is this death decapitalized? And I also wondered, why is this caesura here? And why does the poem has 2 endings? The conclusion I came to is this. Who is the audience of the poem? The poem has 2 audiences. Death is speaking to death, and also the some, the people who call death mighty and dreadful. So I think at the very end, where Donne has now run out of lines, he can't add a 15th line, he has to wrap up his address to death as well as his address to us. So I think that the first half of the line is actually meant for us,
the audience,
not for death. Why? Because death is not a person here. Look at the point.
It's not directly addressed.
Perfect. Look at the point of view shift.
Yes.
No longer, it seems as if we switch from first to third person, but it's not a change of POV, it's a change of audience. So John Donne has paused speaking to death for a minute, and he turns to us in the congregation and he's saying, look, that guy over there, come on, D. So this is not the person, no. This is death, the fear in our mind. He's telling us death shall be no more. So the poem ends here for us. We can say bye-bye and pack up and go home. But death still has to, John Donne has to finish his conversation with death as well. So we have the recapitalization, because death is now repersoned. He's now repersonified, so we can address him again. Death, back to first person, back to the directness. Death, thou shalt die. So I think the last line here re-emphasizes the 2 audiences that the poem is meant to be read by. It's meant for death, because the speaker addresses death directly. Death, be not proud. Thee, this is a direct address, first person. Thou, first person. Thou, first person. Thou, first person. Thee, first person. Thee, first person. All of a sudden, death is third person. That doesn't make sense. What I think is, he has turned his attention away from death to the people who think that death is mighty. And so we have a conclusion here, and the caesura kind of proves the point that this conclusion should be viewed somewhat separately from this conclusion here. So he's talking to us, and then he talks to death. So I think that's an interesting way to see the caesura in tandem with the decapitalization of death here, and also in tandem with the apparent shift of point of view. So that was a long tangent. Yeah.
I agree.
I agree also.
Would have never
very good insight, Adam.
Yeah.
I'm now checking to see if the D in the world of prose is capital D.
It might or might not be. That's the sad part.
I'm checking now.
Because if it's not, that whole idea goes out the window for you guys.
Are you sure necessarily that it might go out? If it's still
I don't think it goes out the window.
The whole idea of the sentence, though, is still the idea that it's generally saying death shall be no more. And then there is a direct addressing of death. Death, thou shalt die. So that still remains.
Yeah, that still remains, even if it's no longer supported by the D.
Yeah.
But hopefully it's decapitalized in the book as well, just to add more clarity to that theory. Because I know with these old poems, sometimes things change depending on which edition you have and stuff like that. So, what themes do we see in this poem? We see death, obviously. We see death.
Fear.
We see power and powerlessness. Appearance versus reality.
Yes.
Death appears to be A, but is really B when you think about it. We see religion, God, and how that can inform our perception of death. And I think we've covered, if not all, most of the obvious devices as well. I made the mistake of filming my lesson on this point before doing this poetry talk, because there are some things I would add that you guys have mentioned. But if it's fine with you guys, I might even add a little clip of our conversation at the end to add further insight. But yeah, do we think we're good with Death Be Not Proud?
Yes.
Should be good. Very good.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah. Very good. We're so good that we have moved from 20 participants to from 24 participants to 20. So 4 people are falling asleep so far.